So how and you've been with John Wood at here for how many years now, Mike?
I'm starting my 23rd.
23rd years. So what are some of the changes that you've seen, I would say, not just in the center, but in agriculture?
I always joke, when I started here, maybe a third of the students had cell phones, I think now they all have two. And so you have to learn to manage that. Sometimes you can incorporate that into the classroom, but sometimes you have to work to keep them from being so incorporated into the classroom. But agriculture has evolved so much. We give the example in a class that I've taught that if you actually went back to biblical times and brought them to a farm, and if you brought them to a farm in the early 1900s, they probably would have recognized most of what was going on there in terms of the hand labor, the use of animals or oxen or, horses, mules, whatever. If you brought them to a farm today, they may not understand they're even on the same planet.
And the example that I give is I grew up baling hay. Most of my summers were spent first cut, second cut, and we transitioned from square bales to round bales. And that was from Mr. Dawson, that was a huge shift that the technology allowed him. And the whole concept of the upper storage of the barn, right? We had the conveyor belt that would take the hay up, and you prefer to work down at the bottom rather than August in East Tennessee up at the top of the barn stacking hay. But I imagine that's a small change compared to some of the other things that have permeated across the agricultural landscape.
Be able to map a field and almost, farm hands-free. They're talking about, riderless tractors here in the fairly near future. It's not out of the question. All those things, again, have allowed us to grow as an industry, and it has had a major impact on labor and where we use labor now as opposed to when we used to. Out of the hay mow, and now maybe understanding a lot of those guidance systems. That's where a lot of the employers today, they like young people because along with their cell phones, they've learned to adapt to that. And so you throw them in there and say, well, you got to program this computer to make it do this and that, and they jump on that and adapt to that very quickly. With the help of a grant and a pretty significant donation, while we're going to have a simulator installed by this fall, but it simulates not only agricultural equipment. Some of the primary ones would be like spray equipment, where you're running a 40 or 60 foot boom sprayer, larger pieces of equipment, whether it's harvesting or planting. But this one also, depending on the software you purchase, can do things like forklifts and payloaders and other industrial type equipment, which are pretty commonplace on farms today. Sure. But we're able to do that and train, which is a pretty good thing in terms of providing an introduction to the safety and how those things need to be handled and managed differently than some of the stuff I grew up on and that's evolved over the years.